the biggest distinction between a business and a strategic plan is how they're used. A business plan is almost always used to solicit some kind of investment. You're making the case for a funder or a bank or some other investor as to why it is that they should invest in your product or your service or your project. And a strategic plan tends to be used more as an internal tool, as a roadmap to guide your daily work, to sort of have your eye on the prize, like where are you heading, right? And also, as an external tool for communicating to your constituents, your stakeholders, about where you're heading. So people often put their strategic plan up on their website just to say, this is where we plan to head in the next 3 years.
A business plan is very much about a particular product you're going to sell. Whereas a fundraising plan is kind of more for the whole organization. So that can be some of the difference.
Also, the business plan includes things like your sales and marketing plan, your staffing plan, it's not your fundraising plan, right? So I think that's what I meant by it being just one piece of the bigger plan. But just in thinking about the distinction between the two, so we talked about their use being one big difference in how you go about using them. A business plan can pertain to either an entire organization, so say a startup organization, but it also can pertain to a piece of an organization, a project or a venture of an organization. It's really important to think about the industry as a whole and sort of an industry analysis and think about what's going on in the external environment. So what's going on politically? So there's a mayoral election in New York City. Will that impact your product? So we were working on a business plan for an education program that they were seeking funding from the Department of Education. Well, a mayoral election may in fact impact what happens for that program and who will be heading up the DOE, and will they be able to convince them that their program is the best way to go, and will the DOE buy it? That's all affected by a political situation, or could be. So they have to take that factor into consideration. Likewise, economics. So if we're in the middle of a recession, that's going to impact your market, right? Or if we're in the middle of coming out of a recession, how is that going to affect who might buy your product or service? If there are social factors or there are technological factors that might affect your service, you just need to think those through because they are part of your market. And finally, understanding your competitors. And I think this is one thing that nonprofits get uncomfortable with sometimes, because we're all sort of out there trying to do good and stuff, and so the idea of like having a competitor in a market feels very alien. We try to soften it by thinking, what are your colleague organizations? Because I think a lot of, and I don't mean that just to be nice, though sometimes it helps with clients because they find that easier to think of, but your colleague organizations can be your competitors or they can be your colleagues, and you could find ways of collaborating. But understanding who is out there in doing something similar. And the nice thing is if you can figure out, well, my niche is consulting with development departments and printing their materials, but your niche is printing materials for something else, and if you, technically you might be competitors, but if you figure out a way to kind of divide up the market, that's great. But really understanding who else is out there, because I think, and when it comes to business planning, this is a big challenge because lots of you have great ideas, but I just caution you to make sure you know who else is out there doing a similar thing. Like, do you really need to start up a nonprofit if there's 5 other nonprofits doing something similar? Like, You may need to, but you want to ask yourself that. And you want to make sure you know exactly who's out there addressing the same demand or need that you're addressing.